Do you want to start or own your own civil engineering company? Well, we've got some great tips for you in this episode. I have with me today Brian Barker. Brian is a principal at Deuel Associates in Clearwater, Florida, and his company is growing like crazy. He's so busy. He's in his car, he's going from project site to project site, but he's taken some time out of his busy day to visit with us today on this episode of the podcast. And he's going to offer some tips for you on how you can start, or maybe not necessarily start yourself, but join on and become an owner in a civil engineering company, and what you should consider in building the company. But first, a word from our sponsor. This Civil Engineering Entrepreneurs series is brought to you by Big Time. Big Time is the industry-leading PSA software providing time tracking, billing, and project management for engineering firms, with the goal of getting your business back to business. You can learn more about Big Time's PSA solution at bigtime.net. All right, now I'd like to welcome our guest for today's episode, Brian Barker. Brian is a principal at Deuel Associates in Clearwater, Florida. Brian, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, Brian, you're a principal in the firm. Let's start by understanding kind of your backstory. How did you end up at Deuel?
Sure. Back in 1999, I started my career as a civil engineer, basically as a civil servant working for the city of Clearwater. And I worked at the city for about 6 years and worked my way up to running the stormwater group. When an opportunity arose, a gentleman by the name of Fred Deuel, who was a pioneer in the Tampa Bay area, licensed engineer, licensed surveyor, we became aware that he was looking to retire after being in business since 1954. And at the same time, it turned out my boss at the city and I were actually doing side work nights and weekends, doing a lot of retail, residential site development at the time. So this was during, a boom time back in 2005 when the market was going crazy. And we had some survey crews working for us on the side. My partner, Al Carrier is his name, has a surveyor's license. So we were actually employing some of Fred Deuel's surveyors on the weekends. So we got to know them and know Mr. Deuel. And the timing was right where we just worked out a deal with him. He wanted to retire. We were both kind of getting bored working for the government and kind of jumped off the cliff together and came to terms with Fred Deuel and became Deuel Associates back in 2005. So here we are 15 years later.
Well, first of all, congratulations. I mean, obviously, if you're still doing it 15 years later, you're doing something right. So congratulations to you guys. But, one question that I'd have on that, which is really interesting to me, is it definitely sounds like a big leap from, working in a government position where, as a young engineer, you haven't had a lot of business experience to kind of take that leap and jump into, because when you're the owner of a business, you're responsible for a lot more than just the technical engineering. And so, how did you, what gave you the confidence to take that leap, and how did you navigate that in the beginning?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of it was, I was just kind of, to be honest with you, I was bored working the normal hours with the set salary, counting on a 3-4% increase every year, and just, got stale. And then some of it was stupidity, hey, not knowing what I don't know. Hey, let's jump off this cliff and see what happens. So the timing was right in some regards. And then about a year and a half, 2 later, the recession hit. And looking back, I was like, what the heck, what a stupid move that was, so, but it all worked out. We made it through. That was back in 2007, 2008, 2009 in there. But it was just, I just wanted more, I wanted to be able to to do the kind of work that I wanted to do, kind of on my own terms. And, I wanted more responsibility. With that comes, more money, which I was eager to learn, being a young engineer. And the timing was right. I didn't have a family at the time. I was married, but, no kids. And it was a good time to do it.
That's great. And one follow-up question that I would have on that is in terms of, the business side of civil engineering, it's always something that it's really hard to learn. I mean, you can go to all kinds of PM training and take courses and stuff, but at the end of the day, you kind of have to manage projects and you kind of have to talk to clients and you kind of have to do the work. How did you find, learning about the business, the financial side of civil engineering when you jumped into it? How did you learn, or how did that process go for you?
I will tell you, it wasn't easy. That was one of the biggest challenges, being trained as an engineer and doing technical work. The whole side of running a business, that's a whole nother ball game, dealing with getting invoices out on a timely manner, getting clients to pay in a timely manner, dealing with human resource issues, getting insurance, working out insurance. That's a whole separate ball game. As far as how did I learn it, we were lucky in some regards that the existing company had a lot of those things already in place. Some of them good, some not so good. So, but it took a lot of time to figure it out. Listening to a lot of insurance agents and payroll companies and figuring out what the difference between them all. Everybody wants to sell you something. So it's just figuring out what was right for us. We were a small company at the time. There were about 20 of us, maybe a couple less. And then before the recession hit, we tightened our belt and we shrunk down to about 9 people. So, but that was probably the toughest part of becoming basically a new business owner, was learning all the non-engineering, non-technical aspects.
Right. Because again, there's, when you start a business, there's always like, the finance side of the business, but in engineering, like in civil engineering, that's a very complex side of the business. I mean, it depends on the type of clients you're dealing with. What are your billing cycles? Are you getting cash quick enough? How much AR is out there? And, and on top of, I'm sure at that time you were very still involved with the project. So you were kind of navigate, both of those kind of, both those buckets at the same time. But I will say that maybe a lesson that we can learn here from this first part of our conversation is you don't have to start a business from scratch if you're a civil engineer and you want to own a business. Like Brian did, you may be able to get in on, purchasing a business or joining a firm and becoming an owner, or, buying into it in some way, shape, or form. And that may be a little bit easier, like Brian said, in that some of the systems and processes were in place from the company initially. So it wasn't like he was starting from scratch and learning from scratch completely. I mean, obviously there was lots that he had to learn himself, but there were some frameworks in place. Would you say that that's accurate, Brian?
Yes, absolutely. Although every day still is a learning experience, even after 15 years. I mean, there's, still new things every day and new costs. And, we're constantly got balls in the air that we're trying to juggle and not drop.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I think you and all business owners, especially these last couple of years with everything that's gone on between pandemics and, listen, weather patterns and all kinds of, especially, for you in Florida and different things that are happening. I'm sure there's always things keeping you on your toes. So let's talk a little bit about just kind of building a civil engineering company. I mean, you came into it, you started building it, you've had some ups and downs, recessions. I think every company, kind of has to deal with that. I think one of the things that is important about growing a company is, finding people, finding engineers, finding talented professionals. Talk a little bit about, your approach to that. I mean, is it Do you have any kind of specific things you do in terms of recruiting or just trying to find people? Because that's, to me, like building your talent base, your team is highly critical.
Absolutely. I will tell you, through the pandemic and up till now, that has been our greatest challenge, is finding good people. We never had to use a recruiter until last year. So 13 of the 15 years, we've been able to hire mostly in the local geographical area. It's greater Tampa Bay area, state of Florida. It becomes a small place in the engineering community, and we never really had problems or challenges finding the right people. But in this pandemic environment that we've been working in almost 2 years now, it has been very challenging, and we've gone out of state with recruiters. We've hired some folks on H-1B visas, and we've had some luck and not so good luck hiring younger people out of school and training them. But that has been a very big challenge for us. But
That's
these days we have given the recruiting world a try, and we have found a couple good people, but obviously that adds greatly to the cost, because you have to, on top of their salary, you've got to pay the recruiting fees, which we've never budgeted for or had to budget for before. So
what do you feel that's attributed to? Do you think it's shortage of professionals or just more work, bigger projects, more companies needing to hire?
I think it's a combination of the two. The development environment in Florida is nothing like I've seen in my last 15 years before. The workload is very strong, and I think that's pretty same across the board. And talking with our peers and other colleagues, and it seems like everybody's kind of in the same boat, and with construction worker shortages, it kind of trickles down to the actual construction after we're done designing, and the owners that are coming to us and other clients, they obviously want things done sooner the better. And it's from all facets, from design to construction, everything's taking longer these days. And dealing with the government agencies, that were closed and working remotely, and, scheduling Zoom calls 2 months out to get a pre-application meeting it kind of compounds. So it's challenging.
Just for some context here, what services does Deuel offer and what markets do you serve? Public, private?
Sure. We're full service civil engineering, and we provide land surveying. So we have our own survey crews as well. We have a pretty good distribution of municipal and private work. We do a lot of work for the local municipalities in the Tampa Bay area. And we do a lot of private development, mainly commercial, doctors' offices, strip centers, storage facilities, chain restaurants, things of that nature. So we cover a very broad customer client base.
That's great. So what advice could you offer to a civil engineer who's, maybe starting up a company, or, like you joined on to a company and is looking to grow the company in terms of service offerings? I mean, I know it's always something where you need to, think about. I mean, in civil engineering, you could offer a lot of different services potentially, which is a good thing, of course, because that means you can get a lot of work on one project. But then, of course, you need to staff up the different divisions, different services, and have different professionals. Also, there's a great opportunity to have like land surveying, which I started out in surveying. And I know how beneficial that can be to couple that with civil engineering. Then having like public and private, right, in terms of maybe different sectors. Talk a little bit about what advice you might give a civil engineer thinking about what markets to get into if they're starting a company.
Sure. Well, I think more than what particular market is, try to be as broad-based as you can. because, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. If you're doing residential and residential market crashes, all your jobs get shut down. And we were fortunate back in 2008 when the residential market got hit, and commercial to some extent, that we had a good backlog of government work. So that really kept us going. So, I mean, my advice would be, be as broad as you can and diversify your customer base as much as you can. You don't always have a choice in the matter. It's certainly not an easy thing to do, but, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
And I would imagine from talking with other business owners on this podcast that the surveying component can be extremely beneficial to a civil engineering company, having that on like in-house.
It is. And it's good all the way around. It's beneficial to the client and it's beneficial to our internal workflow. Being able to walk down the hallway and talk to our surveyors is easier than, try to get a hold of a third-party surveyor to try to figure out a potential issue on a job site, and it makes it easier. It's quicker. It lets us work out site issues, before, during, and after construction. The surveying aspect is challenging. I'm not a surveyor, but I'm exposed to it every day. My partner is a surveyor, but we both deal with it on a daily basis, and it's challenging. Surveyors are a different breed of folks with a different skill set, and it certainly helps when you can speak the same language with them.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I started with my first internship doing surveying, and then when I eventually get into civil engineering design, like you, I recognize that these are very different fields, but they're very complementary. Of course, one kind of goes with the other, and
Right.
there are some really good benefits if you are, if you're listening and you're looking to start a business. A lot of civil engineering projects will start with surveying. And if you can get the surveying side of that project, you kind of have a foot in the door in terms of getting the civil engineering work. Doesn't always happen that you would get both, but it certainly can be very beneficial and an advantage. In fact, I have a really good friend, Bob Mora in New Orleans, who's been on the podcast several times, and he's both a civil engineer and a licensed land surveyor. And I know that that's been extremely beneficial for him to be able to grow his company in New Orleans at a rapid pace because of having both of those services. So that's something that's definitely, important to think about, in considering, how you're going to build your company, the services you're going to add, the team members you're going to bring on, because it can make a big difference in terms of how you can grow. Brian, how many people roughly right now are at Deuel? How many employees?
We have 23 presently.
Okay, 23 people. You're a principal in the firm. Talk about, just give people a little peek into what, and I know every day is totally different, especially in civil engineering, but what are some of the things that you have to be focused on a daily or weekly basis at your position in the company to kind of keep the company moving and growing?
Sure. Well, my biggest role is dealing with clients. I mean, trying to keep bringing the work in, putting proposals together is a very big part of my day. My technical workload is a lot less than it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. Seems to be lessening, every year. As I go out and try to get more work, I'm pretty active in our community here, belong to some civic organizations and on some professional boards. So, a lot of the being out of the office, out in the community, talking to new clients that haven't used us before, but may have heard from us from somebody else or was unhappy with, another firm possibly, or, dealing with other engineering firms as well. I mean, we do surveys all the time for some of the larger engineering firms, that might not have the time to do something or might not want to mess with a certain job, so most of my time is basically PR, putting proposals together, things of that nature.
Roughly on a percentage basis, how much percent of your time is spent on technical at this point? Ballpark.
I'd say maybe 15%.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I would have guessed. And it sounds like the proposal and the PR work I'm assuming kind of what you should be doing in a company your size. But, you said one thing there that I think is important too to key in on is from a business development standpoint. I think a lot of civil engineering professionals, expect to be doing business development at some point in their career if they want to go into kind of that leadership side of the business, whether they're with a corporation or they have their own company or whatever the case may be. But I think you made a good point in that a lot of times you get a lot of business from existing customers. Maybe most of your business, if you have, repeat clients, they're big projects. And so I think that's something that everyone should keep in mind out there, that the quality of work you do and the keeping in constant communication with your clients is a business development driver, in addition, of course, to always trying to kind of seek out maybe some new clients, new markets, new sectors, whatever the case may be. But that is an important that client communication. I found even in the work we do in terms of training and development is really a lot of times what makes people come back to you, because not everybody does communicate that effectively with their clients.
Right. Especially today's day and age when it's so easy to shoot an email or a text message. Some people, they like a good phone call or a face-to-face meeting, I've found that goes a long way.
Awesome. So I have one last question for you here, and then we'll go into kind of our end segment. In terms of leadership, I mean, you have to lead your company. You're leading teams of people, I'm sure, on projects, design work. What philosophies or what practices do you have in regard to leading people in the engineering world, leading project teams? What can you offer to, civil engineers out there that are kind of getting into management, starting to do project management and leading some teams? What advice can you offer from some of your experiences in that field?
Well, I mean, my general philosophy, I mean, I follow that lead by example, so, I'm not always the first one in the office every day, but I try to be, and I try to be part of every team, every project, try to lead by example. The engineers that I have on our team, they hear me on a daily basis. We meet routinely on a weekly basis to go over projects. My door is always open to my staff. I'm always there. My cell phone's always on. I will say, being a business owner, and I've heard people say over the years that work-life balance. I don't buy into that, because being a business owner, your work is part of your life. I mean, you don't get away from it. You've always got somebody that needs something, or if you're not available, you're making more work for yourself later, or something can obviously happen. But if you're going to be a leader, whether it's a project manager or a owner of a business, you've got to prepare yourself mentally and physically to always be there, always have your phone on, always be available. And that's something that I don't think a lot of people are prepared for, because sometimes clients call and they don't want to talk to anybody else, and they get mad if you're not there and you're not available to talk to them, or, hey, sorry, I can't talk to you right now, but talk to this person. They don't want to hear that, and it's just the fact. So I just try to lead the examples as best I can, and I'll keep working as hard as I can for as long as I can. So,
hey, you know what? That's great advice. And I think the lead by example is a great point. I remember as a civil engineer just going to client meetings and watching, my supervisor and my boss, just how he would handle the clients, how he would talk to them. I mean, those are learning moments right there. And it's not even a formal training. It's just you, like you said, working hard every day, doing the right things, and people watching you, and that starts to rub off on them and helps them hopefully to develop some good habits. And so it's great to hear you you say that, and I think it's hopefully advice that I'm sure our listeners can take to heart. People are watching you if you're a leader, and everything you do, they're kind of feeding off of that, and that's important to remember. All right, so we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and finish up with Brian and just give him a few last questions on the civil engineering career hot seat. All right, we're back with Brian Barker. Brian's principal at Deuel Associates in Clearwater, Florida. He's talked a lot about kind of his career coming into ownership of Deuel Associates and how he's been growing the firm and some of his practices and philosophies. And now we're going to pepper Brian with a couple last career-related questions. You ready, Brian?
Sure.
All right. So first question, are there any specific rituals you practice every day? Do you have a morning or lunchtime routine or just something that you do consistently on a daily basis that has contributed to your success?
Well, as far as rituals go, I mean, one thing that I do every day, when I get up, I take my dogs for a walk. So kind of, get outside early, clear my head, kind of think about what's going to happen, during the day before I start reading emails and get caught up into responding to folks. So I take about a half-hour walk. My dogs enjoy it. Then go home and, get ready for the day ahead. I think that's one ritual that happens every day. And then head on into the office and start putting out fires and, getting things done. So I try to exercise regularly to, release some of that stress, after hours and stuff. Sometimes, it can't always happen, but try to do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the good thing about having dogs. They need to walk, which means you need to walk. So
Yeah.
that's always a good thing. All right,
Yeah.
is there one book that you might recommend, or like a book that you've read through your career that just you always remember that book because it gave you some really game-changing advice or something that it stuck with you?
To be honest with you, I'm not a real big reader. So nothing comes to mind. I do the one genre that I do read, and my wife gets me a book every year for Christmas. I read biographies of rock and roll artists.
Wow.
So nothing really that comes to mind to answer your question, because I'm not a really big reader, because I read so much during the day. It's not really something that I enjoy to do, but I do enjoy to learn about other people. And I like
what turned you on to rock? Just because you're a rock and roll fan, I guess.
Yeah, growing up, I always enjoyed listening to rock and roll music. Back in the late '70s, early '80s. Stuff that all the current artists are getting up there in age, and some of them aren't going to be around much longer. I just started picking one or two to read about.
Cool. That's a cool hobby.
Their fame and fortune and rock and roll lifestyle always interest me. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, like you said, being a business owner can be stressful, and things like this, simple things like reading a biography, can help to get some of that stress out, and
Right.
give you some breaks in your day. So that's great. All right,
Yeah.
two more questions. First, thinking back on some of the managers that you may have had on the past, whether it was in government or maybe at any other time in your career. If you think of like a manager that, and you don't have to name anyone, but if you think of a manager that you really liked or that was very helpful to you in your development, what made that person helpful? Like, what was something they did that maybe either you try to do now or that just was helpful for you in your development? Do you remember? Do you recall something?
Yeah, I do. Actually, one of my first, it wasn't my first job out of school, but working my city job, the city engineer at the time. He was very hands off, but he would give you certain tasks to do, and he knew you would struggle with certain things just because he would hand you a project and say, hey, I need this to get done, with very little direction, and he knew I was young and out of school and very little experience, and for me, it was fun to struggle with, certain challenges like that. And, then I'd go back and give it to him and he'd, shake his head and give me one of these. But then he would take the time to sit down, like he knew it was coming, he wanted to see if I could do it. Chances were probably not very good that I could, given my skill set at the time. But then he would sit down and take the time to explain it to you. And really, that's really all it took. So, it's, my first experience with, on the job training. But he expected, hey, you're an engineer, you've got a degree, you've, passed the tests, go figure this out, and giving you just enough rope to take you down to the end of the road. So that's one thing that stands out.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that that's a really important, management philosophy is you need to let go a little bit at some point. You got to let people try things or else they're never really going to be able to learn them on their own. At the same time, though, you're not going to just let them, like you said, give them an unlimited leash where, they just keep going and going and going. You're going to have to check on them and give them support and keep them on the right track. But I'm glad you brought it up because I do think sometimes it takes people too long to get to that point as a manager. And then you're kind of stunting the development of the people that you're leading, which is challenging. Right. It's always a fine kind of line to walk there, but definitely an important one. All right. So I've got one last question for you here. We call this the civil engineering career elevator advice question. So if you got into an elevator with a civil engineer who was less experienced than you only had about 30 to 40 seconds to give him or her advice on their career. What advice would you share with them in that short period of time?
That's a good question. I would say try not to be that stereotypical engineer. Come out of your box. Force yourself to be a good communicator. Pick up the phone, get out from behind your computer, drive down the street, go meet somebody in person, go down to the municipality and talk to, reviewers in person, just make yourself well-rounded, and communication is a big part of that. And it's not for everybody. A lot of engineers like to sit in the corner and crunch numbers, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's not me. That's not my personality and not what I like to do. But I think if you want to be in a management or leadership role, you've got to be a good communicator, and you've got to, and it's not easy to learn or to get there. You just have to, and not always comfortable, I guess I should say. So you've got to come out of your box, and make yourself do it. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, you got to push yourself beyond your kind of comfort zone there, and it's not going to feel comfortable. But like you said, the more you do something, the better you'll get at it. And oftentimes, from my experience, those are the things you probably need to be doing. The things that you're not comfortable with, that's kind of like a sign that you should do that. And it's good to hear you say that. Well, Brian Barker, principal at Deuel Associates in Clearwater, Florida. Brian, I just want to thank you for taking some time out of, you have a busy day today, but I appreciate the time, and I'm sure our listeners are going to take a lot of value out of what you shared here today.
Well, good. I hope so. I thank you for having me. It's been fun.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Civil Engineering Podcast on YouTube, produced by the Engineering Management Institute. We're always looking for new ways to help engineers become effective managers and leaders. You can view all of our content on our website at engineeringmanagementinstitute.org, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel here for our weekly videos. Until next time, please continue to engineer your own success.